In the dark reaches of a quiet galaxy, the Varnix armada prepared for their assault, gliding through the stars with cold efficiency. They were a race of conquerors, famed for their ruthless precision and absolute dominance over the countless civilizations they'd crushed. They believed themselves masters of the cosmos, their military prowess unmatched. And now, their sights were set on humanity. In the Varnix command chamber, Commander Xiron stood, gazing at the holographic display of the human sector with barely veiled contempt. Intelligence reports displayed a human fleet stretched thin, scattered across an isolated region of space, each vessel a relic by Varnix standards. Outdated technology, laughable defenses, and tactical weaknesses practically begging to be exploited. To Xiron, it was almost offensive that this species dared to claim any territory at all. He sneered as his officers reported in, each confirming the sector's lack of real defenses. "This fleet isn't even worthy of our time," he scoffed. "But an easy victory will remind these humans of their place." His officers responded with nods and thin smiles, knowing this campaign would be a mere formality. They had done this 1,000 times before, encountering similar backwater species, each conquest barely enough to test their skills. The Varnix invasion plans unfolded with calculated precision. They would strike without warning, hammering through the human ships before they could even mount a defense. No resistance would stand, no time to react, no message to the broader human forces. In one sweep, this sector would be cleansed, and the Varnix Empire would expand once more. But as the Varnix approached the edge of human space, a minor officer hesitated, eyes narrowing at his screen. "Commander," he said, the slightest hesitation in his voice. "These human ships, they're in an odd formation, almost random. Not what we'd expect from a real defensive posture." Xiron dismissed the comment with a wave. "They're primitive creatures, Officer Tark. They don't know how to defend themselves properly. Their formation is likely unintentional, sloppy positioning. Nothing we haven't seen before." His confidence was absolute, and so were the protocols. They would proceed as planned. As they moved deeper, passing the outer markers of human space, Varnix tactical displays lit up with the signatures of human ships ahead. Scattered clusters of vessels drifted in loose formation, weapons powered down, shields minimal. They were an easy target. Xiron grinned. "Begin the attack," he commanded, his tone almost bored. The Varnix warships surged forward, cutting through space with lethal grace. Energy beams lashed out, piercing human vessels with brutal efficiency. One by one, the ships crumbled under the assault, their metal husks floating lifelessly as the Varnix continued their unrelenting advance. Aboard the Varnix flagship, cheers erupted as the first wave of human ships disintegrated under their fire. The commander's confidence grew with every explosion. "These humans are weaker than I anticipated," he mused, almost disappointed by the lack of challenge. "At this rate, we'll finish before our reserves even need to engage." But as the dust settled, a few officers began to notice the strange behavior of the human vessels. Some drifted aimlessly, not even turning to face the Varnix. Others seemed to lack even basic defensive maneuvers. One officer muttered under his breath, Are these ships even manned?" Xiron scoffed again, refusing to acknowledge the creeping discomfort spreading among his crew. "It doesn't matter if they're manned or not. They're irrelevant. We've dealt with automated defenses before, and these are laughable at best." Still, some of his officers exchanged uneasy glances. There was something off about this human fleet, something that didn't sit right with seasoned soldiers who'd fought countless battles. They were tearing through the human ships with ease, yes, but it was almost too easy. One officer dared to voice his concern. "Commander, if I may, this fleet is disorganized, almost as if it's not meant to be here. Perhaps a reserve, a training fleet, or—" "Enough," Xiron interrupted sharply, a trace of irritation coloring his tone. "You're overthinking it. This is a human fleet, and we are Varnix. They're nothing compared to us, and we're wasting time analyzing it." The Varnix continued their onslaught, destroying ship after ship, but the unsettling feeling among the officers persisted. The lack of resistance, the absence of coordinated defensive moves, the sheer inadequacy of these ships, it all painted a confusing picture. Some began to wonder if this assault was truly the triumph they'd anticipated, or if they had misread something crucial about the humans. Still, Xiron's confidence held strong, even as his officers' doubts grew. To him, the weakness of the human fleet was a gift, a show of cosmic order proving Varnik's superiority. And as the last of the visible human ships crumbled under their assault, he declared with cold satisfaction, "Humanity has been put in its place. This sector is ours." And yet, in the silence that followed, a quiet unease hung in the air, one that even Xiron could no longer ignore completely. But with his pride blinding him, he chose to bury it. As far as he was concerned, this victory was complete. He couldn't see the storm brewing just beyond his vision, or the trap he'd willingly walked into. His hubris blinded him to the truth. This was not the fleet he thought it was. This was only the beginning of his real battle with humanity. The Varnik's fleet advanced through the wreckage of the human ships, carving a path of destruction with the efficiency they were known for. They pressed forward, not even needing to adjust formation as the human vessels fell apart under their assault. Confidence radiated from the Varnik's command chamber, where officers congratulated themselves on what seemed to be another effortless victory. Yet, as the fleet moved deeper, something felt wrong. The Varniks were accustomed to quick conquests, but this felt like something else entirely. The human ships drifted in and out of formation, and as each one disintegrated, there was almost no response from the others. It was as if they were fighting ghosts, enemies who refused to engage, or even acknowledge the Varnik's presence in any meaningful way. One officer hesitated, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. "Commander, the remaining human vessels aren't regrouping. They're not even trying to defend their formation. It's as if..." He trailed off, struggling to voice the unease gnawing at him. It felt like hunting unarmed prey, and the emptiness of the fight was unnerving. Xiron dismissed the concerns with a wave, brushing off the officer's hesitation. "They lack coordination because they're ill-prepared. Humans are known to be impulsive, undisciplined. This is just more proof of their inferiority." He barely spared a glance at the display, already certain that nothing could go wrong. The fleet advanced further, wiping out human ship after human ship with a series of well-aimed strikes. The destruction was total, swift, but hollow. They should have been feeling victorious, yet more and more Varnik's officers found themselves glancing at each other, silently questioning the ease of this encounter. How could a supposedly expanding species deploy ships so outdated and defenses so weak? Was this really the full might of humanity, or something else? Finally, a communications officer leaned over his console, voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, these human ships lack central command signals. They're moving, but there's no coordination, no response patterns." His words were met with a heavy silence as his analysis began to sink in. Still, Xiron's pride held firm. "They're trying to deceive us," he insisted. "It's a simple strategy to make us think they're unprepared, hoping we'll become careless." He spoke as if trying to convince himself as much as the crew. "Continue forward. Don't let them think their charade is working." As they surged deeper, a second officer spoke up, unable to hold his tongue any longer. "Commander, this fleet, they don't even seem to be aware of us. We're eliminating them like they're..." Xiron cut him off, his patience thinning. "Enough! These humans are fools. Whether they're aware or not, it makes no difference to the outcome. We're here to conquer, not to question their tactics." Yet, his words didn't ease the gnawing uncertainty spreading throughout the crew. Despite his repeated dismissals, the officers couldn't ignore the strange sensation that they were missing something vital. The human ships they faced were crumbling like hollow shells, hardly putting up a fight. It was unnatural, a puzzle without any clear solution. An alert sounded as they approached the heart of the human formation, but even here, there was nothing that suggested strength, nothing that hinted at true defense. The Varnik's ships moved through the fleet like a blade through water, with no more resistance than they'd encountered so far. The pride they'd initially felt was fading, replaced by an unspoken tension, a growing suspicion. Finally, the tactical officer spoke up, his voice tight. Commander, I think these human ships are decoys, old models, perhaps. It's possible they're here for another reason, like training or even as bait. This isn't a real fleet. Zyron paused, his expression darkening. He turned slowly to face his officers, the weight of their collective doubts finally pressing down on him. But his pride wouldn't let him acknowledge any fault. A decoy fleet? How laughable. Even if that were true, it changes nothing. If this is the best they can muster, it only proves how little they deserve their place in the galaxy. The tactical officer shook his head, a frown deepening across his face. But if it's a decoy, then where's their real fleet? Why would they leave an entire sector defended by relics? The question hung in the air, sinking into the minds of every officer in the chamber. For the first time, Zyron couldn't immediately dismiss their concerns. He turned to the display, scanning the data for anything he might have missed. Doubt flickered in his eyes, just for a moment, but it was enough for the crew to notice. Still, he forced his voice to remain steady. They're playing games with us, trying to test our resolve. We'll finish here and move on before they can mount any sort of resistance. They can't hide from us. The fleet pressed forward, but the atmosphere had shifted. What had once felt like a triumphant march now felt like wading through a mire of uncertainty. The officers could no longer ignore the strangeness of their surroundings, the absence of a true enemy, the hollow feeling of fighting against scraps. The humans had something planned, of that they were now certain. But Zyron clung to his pride, unwilling to retreat, unwilling to admit even the possibility that humanity might be more clever than he'd given them credit for. As the Varnix fleet advanced deeper, slicing through the last remnants of what they thought was the human defense, the atmosphere on the command ship shifted from triumphant to tense. The ease with which they had obliterated these outdated vessels felt increasingly wrong, unsettling even the most hardened Varnix officers. Doubts had already crept into their minds, but their commander's pride held them in check, steering them forward despite the growing sense of dread. Just as they reached what should have been the heart of human space, the Varnix scanners began picking up a new set of readings. This time, the signals were unlike anything they'd encountered in this sector, strong, numerous, and far too organized to be more remnants or decoys. A high-ranking officer leaned over his display, eyes widening as the readings took shape. "Commander, we're detecting a massive fleet surrounding us." The realization struck like a shockwave. Suddenly, the bridge was buzzing with activity, officers scrambling to confirm what they saw on their screens. New ships appeared from seemingly nowhere, emerging from cloaked positions and surrounding the Varnix on all sides. This wasn't a loose assortment of outdated vessels. This was an armada, a powerful, calculated, and meticulously arranged force. Zyron's confidence faltered as he stared at the holographic display, watching the enemy fleet form a perfect encirclement around his own. His mind raced, struggling to comprehend how such a significant force had remained undetected until now. Before he could issue a command, the human ships moved with deadly precision, closing in from every direction and cutting off any potential escape routes. The humans had arrived in ships unlike anything the Varnix had seen in this sector. These vessels gleamed with advanced technology, bristling with weaponry and equipped with cloaking mechanisms that had kept them hidden until the perfect moment. They weren't the scattered, mismatched ships the Varnix had encountered earlier. These were formidable, uniform, and undeniably modern, a force designed for strategic dominance, not a loose defensive effort. Panic began to ripple through the Varnix ranks. The officers, who had previously been smugly dismissive of human capabilities, now found themselves scrambling to organize a response. Communication channels buzzed with urgent commands, but the human fleet jammed their signals almost instantly, severing the Varnix's ability to coordinate. Zyron's mouth went dry as he realized the full extent of their situation. They were surrounded, isolated, and utterly unprepared. Then, without warning, the humans struck. Coordinated beams of energy tore through the Varnix ranks with surgical precision, disabling ships before they even had a chance to react. The human vessels moved with a fluidity and skill that left the Varnix bewildered. Every attempt at retaliation was thwarted before it began, every maneuver blocked with calculated efficiency. The humans anticipated every move as if they had been studying the Varniks for years, exploiting every weakness. Xiron gritted his teeth, desperately trying to find a way out of this nightmare. "Regroup!" he barked, but the command rang hollow. His officers' faces showed the panic he was trying to suppress. Each attempt to organize met with human firepower that decimated their formation. The Varniks' fleet was crumbling, their precision and unity shattered in the face of an enemy they had grossly underestimated. The human ships pressed in closer, forcing the Varniks into tighter and tighter spaces, hurting them like prey. Xiron's tactical display filled with red markers as ship after ship was disabled or destroyed. It was no longer a battle, it was a massacre. The Varniks, so used to dominating their opponents, found themselves on the receiving end of a strategy far more advanced than anything they had planned. "Commander!" an officer shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. "We can't withstand this. They're too coordinated, too strong. We're being torn apart." But Xiron could only watch in helpless horror as the reality set in. Humanity had lured them into a trap, one so meticulously crafted that even the Varniks' legendary tactics had failed to detect it. The human fleet's assault was relentless, each move methodical, precise, and devastatingly effective. The Varniks were reduced to scattered fragments, their formation obliterated, their once proud armada reduced to wreckage floating in space. They had fallen into a trap designed to exploit their arrogance, their confidence in their own superiority, and it had worked to perfection. Xiron clenched his fists, his voice barely a whisper. How did we not see this?" But there was no answer, only the silence of space and the hum of human ships closing in for the final blow. He had underestimated humanity, dismissed them as primitive and weak, and now he was paying the ultimate price for his arrogance. As the remnants of the Varniks' fleet drifted in ruins, Xiron could see the human ships holding their position, forming an impenetrable wall around the survivors. They weren't here to chase fleeing vessels or pick off stragglers. They were here to ensure no one escaped, no message was sent. The Varniks' fleet was trapped, isolated, and at the mercy of a species they had deemed inferior. It was in that moment, as Xiron stared into the overwhelming force arrayed against him, that he understood the true depth of humanity's cunning. They had prepared for this, anticipated every step, and manipulated the Varniks from the very beginning. The humans had chosen this location, set the bait, and waited for the Varniks to walk willingly into their trap. It was a masterstroke of strategy, one that the Varniks could only admire even as they faced their own destruction. Xiron's last hope faded as he realized there would be no retreat, no victory. Humanity had turned their own arrogance against them, leaving them trapped in the heart of a battlefield they had once thought was theirs. And as he watched the final ships fall, he felt a bitter respect for the species he had so greatly underestimated. In silence, he understood the one undeniable truth: humanity was not the weak, scattered force they had expected. They were something far more dangerous, something the Varniks had never encountered, a foe who could think, adapt, and turn weakness into strength. And now, surrounded and defeated, the Varniks could do nothing but acknowledge the terrible price of their hubris. As the battle drew to a close, the remnants of the Varniks' fleet floated helplessly in space, scattered debris marking what had once been a formidable armada. The silence on the command deck was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had raged just moments before. What few ships remained were battered, barely operational, their defenses stripped away by a foe they had woefully underestimated. For the first time, the Varniks faced the reality of their own mortality, the magnitude of their error looming large before them. Commander Xiron, once so confident in his superiority, stared numbly at the tactical display, struggling to process the full extent of their defeat. The human ships held position around them, an unyielding blockade that left no room for escape. It was clear, there would be no reinforcements, no chance of salvation. This was the end of his fleet, and humanity controlled every moment of it. A crackle of static broke the silence, filling the command deck with an unfamiliar human voice, calm and cold. "To the Varniks, Commander, this is your only warning. You are surrounded. Surrender or face total annihilation." The words were simple, yet they carried an unmistakable authority, a reminder that the Varniks were now at humanity's mercy. Zyron's fists clenched. He wanted to resist, to reject the notion that he should surrender to a species he'd regarded as insignificant. But there was nothing left to fight with. His officers, exhausted and defeated, looked to him for guidance, but their eyes reflected only fear and resignation. They had trusted his judgment, followed him into what they thought would be an easy victory. Now they stood on the brink of destruction, their faith in their own invincibility shattered. He took a shaky breath, swallowing the bitter taste of defeat. "Transmit our surrender," he commanded, the words nearly choking him. It was an admission he never thought he'd have to make, and each syllable felt like a wound. The Varniks were not supposed to lose, certainly not to a species they'd barely considered a threat. As the surrender was transmitted, the human ships held steady, maintaining their formation without firing a single shot. It was a calculated silence, a display of control that only heightened the Varniks' sense of helplessness. They were captives now, prisoners of a war they had initiated with such arrogance. Every moment served as a reminder of the price they had paid for underestimating humanity. Moments later, a single human ship approached, projecting a message onto the Varniks' flagship's display. A human officer, calm and composed, regarded them through the transmission, his eyes cold and resolute. "We expected more from the Varniks Empire," he said, his tone cutting. "But it seems you were all talk. Next time, perhaps you'll think twice before assuming weakness." The words stung, a final insult layered atop their defeat. The human's gaze was steady, unwavering, a stark contrast to the panic that had filled the Varniks' command deck mere moments before. Zyron wanted to retaliate, to reclaim some fragment of his dignity, but the truth was undeniable. They had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and completely outclassed by a species they had dismissed as primitive. He managed only a few words, barely more than a whisper. Why didn't we see it coming?" But he knew the answer. Their pride had blinded them, clouding their judgment, and preventing them from recognizing the warning signs. They had been so certain of their own superiority that they'd walked directly into a trap without the slightest hesitation. The human officer's expression shifted, almost pitying. "You saw what you wanted to see," he replied. "Your arrogance was your undoing." With that, the transmission ended, leaving the Varniks in a silence more profound than any they had known. Zyron felt the weight of his failure settle over him, heavy and unyielding. He had led his fleet to ruin, guided not by strategy, but by arrogance. And now, his empire would know that humanity was not a species to be trifled with. The remaining Varnik ships were allowed to retreat, escorted by human vessels that ensured their compliance. It was a deliberate act, a calculated decision to let survivors return and bear witness to what had happened here. They would carry tales of humanity's cunning, its ruthlessness, and its strength back to the Varniks' homeworld, a warning that would ripple through the Empire like a shockwave. As the fleet limped away, Zyron could feel the shame burn within him, a wound that would never heal. He could almost hear the murmurs that would follow him, the doubts that would haunt his every step. He had brought them to ruin, led them into the jaws of an enemy who had outsmarted them at every turn. And in the depths of his defeat, he understood that humanity was a force they had yet to truly comprehend. As he watched the human fleet disappear from view, Zyron knew that this defeat would be etched into the history of his people, a dark chapter that would serve as a constant reminder of the limits of their pride. Humanity, a species they had dismissed, had humbled the Varniks in a single, devastating blow. And the galaxy would never see them the same way again. The final transmission from the human fleet replayed in his mind, a simple message that would haunt him for the rest of his days. "Next time, pick on someone your own size." It was a parting blow, a reminder that they had made an enemy they could not defeat. In the end, Zyron had no choice but to accept the truth. Humanity had proven themselves, not just in battle, but in the very way they had turned the Varniks' arrogance into their greatest weakness. And as the fleet limped back toward Varnik space, he knew they had lost more than just a battle. They had lost the certainty of their own superiority, and the galaxy would be a far more dangerous place because of it.